My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 6 months ago, I watched my career get assassinated in a sterile conference room that smelled like printer toner and broken dreams. The man across from me, Director of Engineering Marcus Webb, slid an envelope across the table like he was handing me a death certificate. "You're lucky we're even paying out your vacation time," he said, that trademark smirk stretching across his face so wide I could see the coffee stains on his back molars. "Just remember, Sarah, we control your professional references in this industry." That line was supposed to terrify me, make me grovel, maybe beg him not to torch my LinkedIn profile, or poison my reputation across every tech company, from Seattle to San Francisco. But I just stared at that envelope, then back at him, and forced the smallest possible smile. The kind you give someone right before you unplug their life support. The fluorescents hummed overhead like dying insects. The conference room smelled like fear sweat and the chemical optimism of Febreze, trying to mask something rotten. I didn't flinch. I didn't break eye contact. I didn't even blink. "Thank you," I said, folding the severance check neatly into my leather portfolio. "I appreciate the clarity, Marcus." He leaned back in his ergonomic throne hands behind his head like he'd just conquered Rome. "It's just business, Sarah. Nothing personal," which is exactly what people say when it's entirely personal, when it's about power and control, and the fact that a 34-year-old woman from Portland State understood their infrastructure better than their entire C-suite combined. When you're the one person keeping the digital house from burning down, you don't get celebration. You get elimination. What Marcus Webb didn't know, what none of them at TechFlow Dynamics knew, was that I wasn't just a senior systems architect they could delete from their org chart. I was the beating heart of their entire platform, the invisible foundation holding up their $30 million acquisition dreams. And when you remove the foundation from a building, it doesn't collapse immediately. It takes time, weeks, sometimes months, but gravity always wins. As I stood to leave that room, Marcus gave me his final performance, a fake laugh that sounded like gravel in a blender. No hard feelings, right? I paused at the door, turned around, looked him square in his bloodshot eyes with a voice flat as a flatline monitor. "Not a single one." Then I walked out of that room and into the most satisfying 6 months of my entire professional life. The thing about being erased is that it gives you a front row seat to watch everything you built slowly, inevitably, spectacularly fall apart. And when the dust settles, when the acquisition deal dies, and the stock options become toilet paper, there's only one person left who knows how to put it back together. But by then, she's building something better, somewhere else, for people who understand the difference between firing an employee and removing a load-bearing wall. If you've ever been underestimated, undervalued, or unceremoniously shown the door by people too arrogant to recognize your worth, this story is for you. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's watching them try to function without you while you build the empire they'll never be able to touch. Let me tell you how I went from unemployed architect to VP of platform engineering at the most innovative tech company on the West Coast, and how my former employer went from acquisition target to cautionary tale in less than 6 months. It all started with a lie they told themselves, that Sarah Mitchell was replaceable. Walking back to my desk after that termination meeting felt like moving through water. The open office floor of TechFlow Dynamics stretched out before me like a digital graveyard. 30 programmers, product managers, and designers, all suddenly fascinated by their monitors. The silence was deafening. Most people didn't look up. Some pretended to read Slack messages that weren't even open. A few had the decency to glance my way before immediately studying their keyboards, like they contained the secrets of the universe. The air itself felt thinner, like the building's ventilation system had sucked out all the oxygen along with my access credentials. But there was one exception. Jake Thompson, our 22-year-old intern from UC Berkeley, stood awkwardly by the break room, clutching an energy drink like a life preserver. When our eyes met, he gave me a slow, deliberate nod. No words, just respect. That kid understood something the senior staff had forgotten. Engineering isn't about politics or hierarchy. It's about building things that work. I packed methodically, not out of sadness, but with surgical precision. My life at TechFlow had always been minimal by design. One desk drawer, a coffee mug from the Portland Java Festival, a moleskin notebook filled with architecture sketches that looked like abstract art to anyone who didn't understand distributed systems. The company-branded hoodie could stay. I wouldn't wear that thing to clean my garage. Before shutting down my MacBook Pro, for the final time, I performed 2 careful operations. First, I sent an email to Legal Polite Professional, wrapped in corporate speak, requesting written documentation of my intellectual property contributions over the past 18 months. For personal records and future reference, I wrote, using all the right buzzwords. That email was a time bomb disguised as compliance. The second email went to my personal Gmail account, sent from my phone using the office guest Wi-Fi. It contained what I called the Infrastructure Reality Map, a sanitized, carefully legal document outlining the critical systems, architecture I designed, built, and maintained. No proprietary code, no trade secrets, just the logical relationships and dependencies that kept TechFlow's platform functioning. The kind of documentation that existed nowhere else because no one had ever asked me to create it. I hit send, then performed a complete hard drive wipe that would have made NSA security specialists proud. My desktop went black. My name disappeared from Slack faster than a deleted tweet. Someone in IT was clearly monitoring my every keystroke, ready to sever my digital umbilical cord the moment I stepped out of line. The elevator doors closed on my 4 years at TechFlow Dynamics. 4 years of 60-hour weeks emergency patches at 3 a.m. and architecture reviews, where I'd explain complex systems to executives who nodded along while secretly Googling basic programming terms on their phones. I walked out of that building carrying a cardboard box and something far more valuable, the absolute certainty that they had no idea what they'd just done to themselves. My apartment that night felt like a decompression chamber. After 4 years of constant Slack notifications, PagerDuty alerts, and quick sync meetings that somehow lasted 2 hours, the silence was almost overwhelming. I sat on my couch laptop, open staring at a blank document. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about production fires, or sprint planning, or the next deployment pipeline crisis. I was thinking about truth. I started writing the most honest resume of my professional life, not the keyword-stuffed corporate fiction my former colleagues would recognize, but facts, raw, undeniable facts, designed and implemented load-balancing protocols that handle 94% of platform traffic after third-party CDN integration failed catastrophically. Performance improved 43% while reducing infrastructure costs by $200,000 annually. Single-handedly architected disaster recovery systems that prevented data loss during 3 separate outages, including the Christmas Eve incident that saved Q4 revenue targets. Reverse-engineered and rebuilt deprecated authentication modules in 36 hours when legacy vendor support disappeared overnight, preventing complete platform shutdown. Maintained undocumented failover protocols that reduced API latency by 52% across all microservices. No corporate buzzwords. No collaborated cross-functionally with stakeholders to drive synergistic solutions. Just the unvarnished truth about what I'd actually built while everyone else was in meetings talking about building things. When I finished, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months' clarity. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in my entire career. I created a consulting business. Not some grandiose startup with venture capital dreams and ping-pong tables, just a simple LLC Mitchell Systems architecture. One woman, one laptop, and a phone number that nobody at TechFlow would ever connect to their former senior architect. Word travels fast in the Pacific Northwest tech scene, especially when you're solving problems that other people can't. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 clients, all referrals from former colleagues who'd escaped the corporate grinder before it could digest their souls completely. The work was clean, pure. A fintech startup in Portland needed their payment processing pipeline optimized. I fixed it in 4 days. No status meetings, no stakeholder alignment sessions, no PowerPoint presentations explaining why the fix would work. Just problem-solution implementation done. A healthcare company in Vancouver needed their patient data synchronization rebuilt after a security breach. 2 weeks later, they had a system more robust than what Fortune 500 companies were running. The CTO sent me a bottle of 20-year-old scotch and a handwritten note. "You just saved our company." But the most satisfying project came from an unexpected source. Data Vault Industries, a mid-sized cloud infrastructure company based in Bellevue, had heard about my work through the technical grapevine. Their VP of Engineering, Michael Chen, called me personally. "Sarah," he said, during our initial phone consultation, "we've been watching TechFlow's platform performance metrics since you left. Their API response times are degrading week over week. Whatever you built there, they can't maintain it without you." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Systems require understanding, not just operation. "We'd like to offer you a position, Senior Principal Architect, full autonomy over infrastructure decisions, equity package that makes your previous salary look like lunch money." "I'm listening. But first," Michael continued, "we want to see if you're interested in a consulting project. We're evaluating TechFlow for potential acquisition. We need someone who understands their platform architecture to conduct due diligence. Someone who can tell us if their technology is actually worth what they're asking." The irony was beautiful. My former employer's potential buyer wanted to hire me to evaluate the systems I'd built. The universe had a sense of humor, after all. "When do we start?" I asked. Meanwhile, back at TechFlow Dynamics, the cracks were beginning to show. I didn't need inside information to track their decline. System performance metrics are public data, if you know where to look. API monitoring services, user complaint forums, GitHub, commit frequency, all the digital breadcrumbs that tell the real story behind corporate PR statements. Their weekly deployment schedule had slowed to bi-weekly, then monthly. Error rates were climbing. User complaints on social media were trending upward. Why is the platform so slow now? My data isn't syncing properly. This feature used to work perfectly. I recognized the symptoms immediately. They were what I'd spent 4 years preventing. The critical system I'd built, the one buried under 7 layers of microservices and 3 undocumented API calls, was starting to fail. It was the digital equivalent of a load-bearing wall that everyone could see, but nobody understood. And now that I wasn't there to maintain it, to adjust it, to whisper the right incantations during high-traffic periods, it was slowly forgetting how to work. But the beautiful part, nobody at TechFlow could even identify what was breaking. They just knew something was wrong, and it was getting worse every day. I sat in my home office, consulting contracts spread across my desk, watching my former employer's stock price fluctuate like a heart monitor attached to a dying patient. Soon, Michael Chen and Data Vault Industries would come calling with their acquisition due diligence request. And when they did, I'd have a front row seat to the most expensive technical interview of my life. The question wasn't whether TechFlow Dynamics would survive without me. The question was how long it would take them to realize they were already dead. 3 weeks after my termination, the first desperate text message arrived. 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. The timestamp that screams, "Production emergency," in any programmer's language. "Sarah, it's Kevin from DevOps. Sorry to bother you, but the load balancer is acting weird. Do you remember anything specific about the Redis failover config? Nothing urgent, just curious." Kevin Martinez, one of the few competent engineers left at TechFlow. Quiet guy who understood infrastructure better than most always, wore vintage band t-shirts, never caused drama. For him to reach out meant something was seriously broken, and they were running out of options. I stared at the message for 5 minutes, phone glowing in my dark bedroom. The smart play would be to ignore it, maintain professional distance, let them figure it out themselves. Instead, I typed back, "No longer with TechFlow. Can't provide technical support for proprietary systems. Good luck." His response came immediately. "Understood. Thanks anyway." But 30 minutes later, another message arrived from a different number. "This is Amanda from the platform team. Kevin gave me your number. We're seeing cascade failures across the session management layer. Marcus is freaking out. Any chance you could do paid consulting emergency rates?" Now that was interesting. Amanda Rodriguez had been hired 2 months before my termination. Sharp kid, MIT graduate, specialized in distributed systems. If she was reaching out, it meant the senior engineers were stumped. I didn't respond, not because I was being vindictive, but because I was learning something valuable. The architecture I'd built was failing in ways they couldn't understand or predict, and rather than admit they needed help, they were trying to crowdsource solutions through back-channel communications. By Thursday morning, the Whisper network had fully activated. 5 unread messages from various TechFlow employees, all asking variations of the same question. "Do you remember how the insert critical system was originally configured?" None of them mentioned my name explicitly. None of them acknowledged that I designed these systems from scratch. They just wanted my brain without my name attached to it. Plausible deniability for when the ship finally sank. That's when Michael Chen called. "Sarah, we need to accelerate our timeline. TechFlow's board reached out to us directly about acquisition discussions. They're claiming some temporary technical difficulties that should be resolved soon." I almost laughed. "Temporary? We'd like you to start the technical due diligence immediately. Full access to their code base, architecture documents, everything. Can you be in Bellevue tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely." The Data Vault Industries headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower overlooking Puget Sound. Floor-to-ceiling windows, standing desks, artisanal coffee, and an atmosphere of confident competence that felt like oxygen after months of corporate suffocation. Michael Chen was exactly what you'd expect from a successful VP of engineering, early 40s. Calm intensity, the kind of guy who'd written code for 15 years before moving into management and actually understood what his teams were building. Before we dive into TechFlow's technical evaluation, he said, "Let's talk about your future here. We've done our homework on your background. Your work at TechFlow was impressive, even if they were too stupid to recognize it. He slid a folder across the conference table. VP of Platform Architecture, complete autonomy over infrastructure decisions. Your team, your budget, your vision. Starting salary is $285,000 plus equity that vests immediately. I opened the folder. The numbers were significant, but what caught my attention was the reporting structure. I'd report directly to the CTO, not through layers of middle management. No politics, no bureaucracy, just engineering. What about the TechFlow evaluation? I asked. Michael smiled. Consider it your first project. We need to know if their technology is worth acquiring, or if we're better off hiring their talent and rebuilding from scratch. When do you need the assessment? 2 weeks. Full technical audit scalability analysis, code quality review, and architectural recommendations. I closed the folder. I'll need complete access to their production systems. Already arranged. TechFlow is desperate enough to grant full technical transparency. The irony was perfect. My former employer would be paying DataVault for due diligence that I'd be conducting on systems I'd designed. They'd essentially be paying me to evaluate my own work without knowing I was the one doing the evaluation. One more thing, Michael added. This stays confidential until we complete the acquisition or walk away. TechFlow's leadership can't know you're involved. Understood. As I walked out of DataVault's offices that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: professional excitement. Not the adrenaline rush of fixing broken systems at 3 a.m., but the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful with people who understood its value. My phone buzzed with another message from TechFlow. This time, from someone I didn't recognize. Hi, Sarah. I'm Brad, new hire on the platform team. Marcus said you might be able to help us understand some legacy architecture decisions. Could we set up a brief call? I deleted the message without responding. Marcus Webb was now outsourcing his technical leadership to his fired predecessor through intermediaries. The desperation was becoming palpable. But the best part: tomorrow morning, I'd walk into TechFlow Dynamics as a DataVault consultant, sit across from Marcus in the same conference room where he'd terminated me, and begin the most satisfying technical evaluation of my career. He still wouldn't know who was really evaluating his company's future, but he was about to find out what happens when you fire the only person who understood how your house was built. Walking into TechFlow Dynamics as a DataVault consultant felt like returning to a crime scene wearing a disguise. Same cheap carpet, same dying succulents, same conference room that smelled like fear and industrial coffee. But this time, I carried a different kind of power. Marcus Webb sat at the head of the conference table, visibly nervous despite his pressed shirt and practiced smile. To his left sat Jennifer Walsh, the VP of Product, who'd never written a line of code, but somehow became an expert on technical feasibility. To his right, Dr. Robert Kim, the CTO, who'd been hired 6 months earlier for his impressive academic credentials and complete lack of hands-on engineering experience. Thank you for coming. Marcus began his voice, carrying that false confidence I remembered so well. We're excited to show DataVault what we've built here. I nodded professionally, opening my laptop. I'll need complete access to your production environment code repositories and architectural documentation. Of course, Dr. Kim interjected, though I should mention that some of our systems were developed by former employees who didn't always follow our current documentation standards. Translation: we fired the person who built everything, and now we can't explain how it works. Not a problem, I replied. I specialize in reverse engineering undocumented systems. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Something in my tone had triggered a memory, but he couldn't quite place it. I was counting on that confusion. The first day of technical review was almost too easy. I logged into systems I'd designed, reviewed code I'd written, examined architecture diagrams I'd created. It was like reading my own diary. If my diary contained load balancing algorithms and database optimization strategies. The current TechFlow team had made modifications, of course. Band-aid fixes for problems they didn't understand. Patches stacked on patches, creating a digital house of cards that could collapse at any moment. By lunchtime, I'd identified 12 critical vulnerabilities, 7 performance bottlenecks, and 3 single points of failure that could bring down the entire platform. The most damaging discovery was what they'd done to my session management system. Someone, probably Marcus himself, had simplified the failover logic by removing what they thought were unnecessary redundancies. They'd essentially performed heart surgery with a chainsaw cutting out safety mechanisms they couldn't identify. "How's the evaluation going?" Dr. Kim asked during our afternoon check-in. "Interesting," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm seeing some unusual architectural decisions. Could you walk me through the evolution of your core platform?" For the next hour, I listened to 3 executives try to explain systems they'd never understood. Marcus talked about industry best practices and scalable solutions. Jennifer mentioned user-centric design philosophy. Dr. Kim threw around academic terms like distributed consensus algorithms and Byzantine fault tolerance. None of them could explain why their platform worked. They just knew that it had worked until recently. "One more question," I said, as the meeting concluded. "Who was your lead architect before the recent restructuring?" The silence was loud enough to shatter windows. Marcus cleared his throat. "That would be Sarah Mitchell, but she's no longer with the company. Philosophical differences about technical direction." "I see. And the knowledge transfer process?" Another silence, this one even louder. "Sarah was uncooperative during the transition," Jennifer said carefully. "She didn't provide adequate documentation for her projects." I almost smiled. The woman who'd spent 4 years creating detailed system documentation for every project was suddenly uncooperative about knowledge transfer. The revision of history was breathtaking in its audacity. Would it be possible to contact Ms. Mitchell for clarification on some architectural decisions? I asked innocently. Marcus's face went pale. That wouldn't be advisable. Legal concerns, confidentiality agreements. Translation: we threatened her career and burned that bridge so thoroughly that she'd probably laugh if we called begging for help. That evening, I returned to my hotel room and wrote the most damning technical assessment of my career. Not because I was vindictive, but because I was honest. The TechFlow platform was a ticking time bomb, held together by systems they couldn't maintain, and patches they didn't understand. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael Chen. "How's the evaluation going?" I replied, "Fascinating. We'll have preliminary findings tomorrow." "Good or bad? Depends on your perspective. TechFlow's platform is more fragile than they realize, but their problems are solvable with the right expertise." Meaning, you shouldn't acquire their technology. You should acquire their best people and rebuild from scratch. Including Sarah Mitchell. I stared at that message for a long moment before typing, especially Sarah Mitchell. But first, I had one more day of due diligence to complete. One more day of watching Marcus Webb try to explain systems he'd never understood, while sitting in the same room where he'd destroyed my career 6 months earlier. Tomorrow, I'd deliver my final assessment to Data Vault. And then Marcus would learn what it really costs to fire the only person who knows how to keep your house from falling down. The universe, it seemed, had an excellent sense of timing. The final presentation day arrived with all the ceremony of an execution. Marcus Webb had clearly spent the weekend preparing, armed with a 40-slide PowerPoint deck that promised to showcase tech flows, revolutionary platform architecture, and sustainable growth trajectory. The Data Vault delegation filled one side of the conference room. Michael Chen, their CEO, Patricia Voss, and their Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Lisa Park. I sat quietly at the end of the table, laptop open, taking notes with the detached professionalism of a coroner documenting a cause of death. Marcus began with confidence, clicking through slides filled with upward trending graphs and impressive-sounding metrics. As you can see, our platform handles over 2 million API calls daily, with 99.7% uptime reliability. I didn't interrupt. I just typed notes that would later become part of my confidential assessment, uptime statistics, cherry-picked from peak performance periods. Current degradation not reflected in presentation metrics. Our microservices architecture ensures scalability and fault tolerance. Marcus continued displaying a colorful diagram that looked impressive to anyone who didn't understand the underlying implementation. More notes. Architecture diagram oversimplified. Critical dependencies and single points of failure not disclosed. For 30 minutes, I watched 3 executives sell a fantasy version of their platform to buyers who thought they were getting technical due diligence from an independent consultant. The irony was so thick, I could have spread it on toast. Then, Marcus reached slide 37, engineering team and knowledge management. Our robust documentation standards and collaborative development process ensure that all institutional knowledge is preserved and accessible, he said, avoiding eye contact with me. Recent personnel transitions have had zero impact on operational capabilities. That's when I spoke up. Could you elaborate on that last point? I asked, my voice calm and professional, specifically regarding the departure of Sarah Mitchell. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Marcus's confident facade cracked like thin ice. Ms. Mitchell left the company due to strategic realignment. Her responsibilities were successfully transitioned to our existing team. I see. I opened a new document on my laptop. Could someone walk me through the session management failover protocol? Silence. What about the Redis cluster configuration for high availability caching? More silence. Perhaps you could explain the load balancing algorithm for API request routing during peak traffic periods. Marcus looked like a deer caught in headlights. Dr. Kim shuffled through papers that contained no answers. Jennifer Walsh stared at her phone as if it might provide divine intervention. These are highly technical implementation details, Marcus finally said. Our development team could provide specifics if needed. Your development team, I replied, has been asking former employees for technical guidance on these exact systems. I have the text messages. The room went silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of Marcus Webb's career imploding in real time. Michael Chen leaned forward slightly. Ms. Mitchell, could you clarify your statement about text messages? I reached into my portfolio and withdrew printed screenshots of the midnight communications I'd received over the past month. TechFlow employees have been contacting me repeatedly for assistance with systems they can't maintain or understand. Patricia Voss, DataVault's CEO, examined the documents with the focused intensity of a prosecutor reviewing evidence. These messages indicate critical knowledge gaps in TechFlow's technical capabilities. Furthermore, I continued, my analysis of their codebase reveals multiple architectural dependencies on undocumented systems. Their platform stability depends on configurations that no current employee fully understands. Dr. Kim attempted damage control. Surely any technical documentation gaps can be addressed through proper engineering processes. Dr. Kim, I interrupted. Your platform is currently experiencing cascading failures in the session management layer. Error rates have increased 43% since Sarah Mitchell's departure. Your users are reporting data synchronization issues that stem directly from modifications made to her failover protocols. The silence that followed was the sound of a $40 million acquisition deal dying. Patricia Voss closed her notebook and stood up. We'll need to suspend acquisition discussions pending resolution of these technical concerns. Michael Chen nodded grimly. TechFlow's platform appears to have hidden dependencies on unavailable expertise. The risk profile is unacceptable for our investment parameters. As the Data Vault delegation gathered their materials, Marcus made one last desperate attempt. Wait, please. These issues are temporary. We can resolve any technical challenges with adequate time and resources. I looked directly at him for the first time since entering the room. The technical challenges aren't temporary, Marcus. They're structural. You can't maintain what you don't understand, and you can't understand what you chose to eliminate. Recognition dawned in his eyes. The voice, the confidence, the intimate knowledge of their platform's vulnerabilities. He knew exactly who I was. Sarah, he whispered. I smiled, the same small smile I'd given him 6 months earlier in this exact room. Hello, Marcus. Thank you for the opportunity to evaluate your technical capabilities. I appreciate the clarity. Then I packed my laptop, shook hands with the Data Vault team, and walked out of TechFlow Dynamics for the second and final time. 3 hours later, I signed my employment contract with Data Vault Industries as their new VP of Platform Architecture. Starting salary, $285,000 plus equity that would vest immediately. My first official responsibility would be hiring a team of senior engineers to build the next-generation platform that would compete directly with TechFlow's failing infrastructure. And I knew exactly which engineer I wanted to hire. First, Jake Thompson, that brilliant intern, who'd had the courage to show me respect when everyone else was pretending I didn't exist. As for TechFlow Dynamics, their stock price dropped 18% when news of the failed acquisition became public. Marcus Webb was placed on administrative leave pending an internal review of his engineering leadership decisions. Dr. Kim lasted another month before accepting a position at a university, where he could return to theoretical computer science without the messy reality of production systems. Jennifer Walsh pivoted to a product management role at a fintech startup, where her lack of technical expertise would be less obvious. And somewhere in the ruins of TechFlow's platform systems I'd built continued to fail in ways no one else could fix because no one else had taken the time to understand them. But that's what happens when you fire the architect and expect the building to maintain itself. 6 months later, I sat in my corner office at Data Vault Industries, watching the sunrise over Puget Sound through floor-to-ceiling windows. My team of 12 engineers had just completed the beta release of our new platform, faster, more reliable, and more scalable than anything TechFlow had ever built. Jake Thompson knocked on my door, holding 2 cups of artisanal coffee and wearing a vintage Nirvana t-shirt that would have horrified TechFlow's corporate dress code. Morning, Sarah. Ready for the demo presentation. I accepted the coffee and smiled. Let's show them what proper engineering looks like. In 3 hours, we'd be presenting our platform to the same clients who'd grown frustrated with TechFlow's declining reliability. Word had spread quickly through the industry. The architect who'd built TechFlow's core systems was now building something better somewhere else. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Marcus Webb had updated his profile, seeking new opportunities in technical leadership and strategic vision. I didn't laugh. I didn't share the irony with my team. I just deleted the notification and focused on the future I was building with people who understood the difference between managing engineers and enabling them. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so much better that they become irrelevant. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, they'll pay you to evaluate their own obsolescence while you're doing it. But this story doesn't end with my success or Marcus Webb's failure. It ends with a lesson that every engineer, every architect, every person who builds things that matter should remember. Your value isn't determined by the title on your business card, or the size of your office, or the politics you navigate. Your value is in what you build, what you understand, and what happens when you're no longer there to hold it all together. Make yourself irreplaceable, not through office politics or strategic positioning, but through competence so deep and understanding so complete that the systems you create become part of the foundation everyone else builds upon. And when they inevitably try to erase you from the org chart, make sure you've documented everything in ways that only you can fully understand. Because bridges burn, but knowledge is forever. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe gives you a front row seat to watch gravity do its beautiful, inevitable work. 6 months later, TechFlow Dynamics filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy after losing 70% of their enterprise clients to platform instability issues. The company was eventually acquired by a competitor for parts with their most valuable asset, listed as experienced engineering talent, rather than proprietary technology. Data Vault Industries, meanwhile, secured $40 million in Series B funding, based on the strength of their platform architecture and the reputation of their engineering leadership. Sarah Mitchell was promoted to Chief Technology Officer after 18 months, making her one of the youngest CTOs in the Pacific Northwest tech industry. Marcus Webb's LinkedIn profile still lists him as seeking new opportunities. Jake Thompson was promoted to Senior Engineer and now leads the team responsible for platform reliability. His desk still features energy drinks and vintage band t-shirts, but also a small placard that reads, "Respect is earned through competence, not hierarchy." And somewhere in a server room in Bellevue, Washington, systems designed by Sarah Mitchell continue to process millions of transactions daily with 99.97% uptime reliability. Because the best buildings are the ones that outlast their architects. The best code is the code that solves problems long after its author has moved on to solve bigger ones. And the best revenge is building something so elegant, so robust, and so fundamentally superior that your former employer's platform looks like a house of cards in comparison. Subscribe if you enjoyed this journey through corporate karma and engineering justice, like if you've ever been underestimated by people who should have known better. And share if you believe that competence always finds a way to rise above politics. Because in the end, systems remember, and gravity always wins.